Let's move on now. Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu's move to push the judicial reform bills is backfiring at the government. Israel has been paralyzed for over 10 weeks. Residents are taking to the streets protesting the government's proposed judicial reforms. A protest took place outside the home of Arye Deri, an ally of Prime Minister Netanyahu. The judicial reform bills, which seek to restrict the powers of the judiciary, were met with massive resistance. Reservists also unveiled banners on the statue of Theodore Shas at the entrance to the coastal city of Hazlia. The banners had the phrase, "If you will, democracy will win. And it's not a dream, it's a revolution." Another fresh set of demonstrations are planned for Thursday, and 500,000 people expected to be on the streets of major Israeli cities, on highways and outside the homes of coalition members. The Israel parliament on Thursday ratified a bill that would shield Prime Minister Netanyahu from being ousted. The Knesset approved the bill under which prime ministers can be deemed unfit. This would likely ensure that Netanyahu does not suffer the fallout from any of the corruption trials against him. On the other hand, opposition and anger against the judicial reforms is spreading through the defense forces. On Wednesday, reports say that reservist soldiers from multiple units declared they would not show up for duty. As per ground reports, the Israeli Defense Force has identified a significant drop in the number of ground force troops reporting for reserve duty. 700 reservists in the Nahal Brigade are not reporting for duty. 100 officers from the Armored Corps were dismissed after they did not report to work. 100 senior reservists, 180 pilots, 50 controllers, 40 drone operators from the Air Force, Brothers in Arms, the reservist organization in the IDF, and around 43% of the 551st Paratroopers Brigade did not report for duty this week. One of the founding members of Brothers in Arms said the army was disintegrating before the defense minister's eyes. He said he expects the defense minister to stand up and say he will not vote for the laws. The protests are getting more intense and further paralyzing Israel, and the government does not seem to want to back down regarding the controversial laws. Reservists in the defense forces have warned the government they will not be able to serve in undemocratic Israel, which they claim the country will become under the Netanyahu government's rule. And for more on this, our correspondent Jody Cohen is now joining us live from Tel Aviv. Hi, Jody. What can we expect today from the protesters in what they're calling Day of Paralysis?
Hi, Eric. Yes, so I'm in Tel Aviv by the landmark Azrieli Towers. We're expecting to see the main protest taking place here, marching down the street. And I don't know if you can see just here to my right is an art installation, which basically is an hour clock that is suggesting that time is running out for the startup sector in Israel, because we're in the heart here of the startup sector, and time is running out for democracy. And to my left, behind me, you can see the people in red. These are the organizers of the Handmaid's protest. Now, that's a play on the Handmaid's Tale. And we've seen striking images over the past few weeks of women dressed in handmaids' robes in protest against the coalition's proposed judicial reforms. And today, we're going to see men and women dressed in red protesting along here. There's going to be a big march. 500,000 people are expected to take part in protests across the country. We've seen protests at the homes of some of the coalition ministers. Later on this evening, we're expecting marchers to walk to Bnei Brak. Now, that's a sensitive location. That's an ultra-Orthodox city, and the population there supports the ultra-Orthodox parties who are part of the coalition, and they largely support the judicial reform plans because they see the judiciary as having taken too much power, and specifically over the past several years that the judiciary, they feel, has been anti-ultra-Orthodox. The airport will also see some protests. This will be for the third week in a row because Prime Minister Netanyahu is expected to fly to the UK for a meeting with the Prime Minister there. The police have said that their job is to protect everyone, and the police chief has affirmed the right to free speech and the right to protest. However, said that blocking roads without prior coordination won't be accepted. We have seen some unpleasant incidents over the weeks of protest, but largely they've gone off peacefully.
Jody, what's the status of the legislation and also negotiations?
So most of the judicial reform bills that were part of the original package, they've all been paused. The government is saying that they've paused that because they're listening to the protesters, and they have called on the opposition to use this time to negotiate. The opposition is saying that this is a break because of the Ramadan, the Passover and the Easter holidays, and that they're saying that the judicial selection bill, which is progressing still in Parliament, that's been amended by the coalition, but the opposition has rejected that amendment. Meanwhile, there are some other bills that were beyond the original judicial reform package, and they're still being debated. Throughout the night, we saw debates, and at 6 o'clock this morning, a final vote passing a bill that would stop the Supreme Court from ordering a sitting prime minister to step down in the event of a conflict of interest. And that has been seen to be tailored because of Prime Minister Netanyahu and the corruption charges that he's facing. Meanwhile, on Thursday, this has been called a day of paralysis, as you said, and the language suggests an escalation. In previous days of protest, we've seen days of disobedience, days of disruption. Now this is going to be a day of paralysis. And we've seen that the protests did start earlier this morning than in previous days of disruption. For example, first thing this morning, we heard that in Caesarea, a helipad had been taken over by protesters. The sign was taken over in Herzliya, as you said, and also a big banner of the Israeli Declaration of Independence was hung from the Jerusalem Old City walls. So while we're not seeing direct talks and negotiations yet between the politicians, I have to say that on Thursday, in the last day of disruption, for the first time, I did start to see people debating. Yes, they were arguing, but they were debating and they were discussing the judicial reform proposals on the streets. So we might expect to see more of that debating on the streets, if not in Parliament. Well, there's certainly debates in Parliament, but between the coalition and the opposition.
All right, live from Tel Aviv, Israel, our correspondent Jody Cohen. Thank you.
Thank you.
WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.